My name is Brent Stevens. I'm the superintendent of Berkeley Unified School District. Thank you so much for deciding to spend a little bit of time with us this evening. This is the second African American Affinity Town Hall that we held. About 2 weeks ago, we held a similar town hall where we were able to speak with well over 100 members of our community about a whole variety of topics. We very quickly agreed that we would come back together, recognizing that we were in need of more dialogue. And I'm really pleased that we've got a large audience again, and then pleased that we've expanded our panel this evening to include more live interaction, more questions, and more opportunity both for the district to listen attentively to the needs of the African American community here in Berkeley and to provide feedback to the district that we will value as we move forward. With that, I'm going to propose to jump in. I'd love to make some introductions of the folks who are joining us this evening. And then very, very shortly, we're going to jump right into our activities. So first, by way of a recognition, all of us here in Berkeley Unified acknowledge that we are in an extraordinary moment, and yet one that connects back over this long arc of history to issues that continue to be unresolved in our country. These aren't just issues of police brutality and violence towards Black people in this country, but they go to the very root of institutional racism, not only in our police forces, but our school system, our government, in the way that we lend money, and the way we construct our neighborhoods, the way people have access to jobs and healthcare, and that list goes on and on. We have been horrified to watch the unjust killings taking place in this country, and we've been inspired by the strong level of activism. We recognize that in this moment, there are many, many emotions taking place, both in Berkeley and particularly for African American families, and want to acknowledge as we start this conversation that this is true. Before I get started, I do want to just sort of drop the note in that we're committed to having a series of dialogues with the African American community here in Berkeley. This is the second in a series of town halls, but please know that it's not the last. We're very glad to be here. We're very glad for the partnership. And we hope that you recognize that if anything is left undone this evening, that there will be more opportunities for us to build bonds, to get to know one another, and to talk about issues that are important in the lives of your children and your families. This evening, we're joined by Dr. Travis Bristol. Dr. Bristol is a parent at Malcolm X and has been active in parent leadership at that school. He is also a professor up at Cal, and we're very glad that he has agreed to serve as parent facilitator. Dr. Bristol, welcome to you, and thanks very much for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Stevens.
And we're joined as well by a number of parent panelists. These are BUSD parents who have agreed to take part in this and to serve as both askers of questions, to note what's going on with our audience, and to make sure that the conversation feels like it's targeted, that it's relevant, and that it's going in the right direction. So let me just welcome our parent panelists. So Shanti Joseph from Berkeley Arts Magnet, welcome to you. And Tiara Mosley from Berkeley Independent Studies. Laura Babbitt from Rosa Parks Elementary School. And Casey Robinson, also from Rosa Parks. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being here. We're joined as well by a number of members of the Berkeley Unified School Board. In fact, we have one more than is listed here. So I believe joining us this evening is Board President Judy Appel. We have Director Khadija Brown, I believe, on the call at this point, Director Ty Alper, and then I know Director Beatrice Leva-Cutler is also with us this evening. So thanks to our board members for joining us. And then we're also joined by a number of BUSC staff members, including myself, Brent Stevens. Bajay Tiara is the Associate Superintendent of Education Services. Ann Caligari is the Supervisor of the Office of Family Engagement and Equity. We're joined by Kamaro Gwynn, who's the manager of Berkeley Unified's African American Success Project. And then not here tonight, taking a rare night off, is Natasha Beery, Director of Berkeley School Excellence Program. And then I believe in our audience is also Trish McDermott, Public Information Officer. And way, way behind the scenes is Jay Nitschke, our Director of Technology, making sure that everything works. So here, I just want a special note of gratitude to Ann Caligari, the supervisor of OFE, the Office of Family Engagement and Equity. Ann has really worked very tirelessly over the scenes to try and build the bridges and create these communication opportunities. So thank you, Ann. We really appreciate your work. And Ann worked very closely with our parent panelists to construct the agenda. So thank you for that. And as we close, I just wanted to note that Kamara O'Gwyn will sort of bring the whole procession home. About the final 10 minutes or so of our evening together will be closing remarks from Mr. O'Gwyn. Where we're going this evening is the following. We'll work our way pretty quickly through some opening remarks. It won't take but a few minutes. We'll then jump into a live interview with me and members of the staff. We've prepared some questions and then are looking forward to folks in the audience asking follow-up questions. We'll then move into a period of open live question and answers where members of this call will be able to raise their hand to be acknowledged and ask questions. And then finally, we'll talk about next steps and closing remarks again from Mr. Kamara O'Gwyn. So with that, I'd like to turn over to our panelists. And I'm just checking to make sure to check on who's here. Board President Appel, are you with us this evening?
Yes, I am.
There you are. Good evening.
Good evening. I feel like I've been on 5 meetings with you today.
It's been a lot of time on Zoom, I know. So I'm going to welcome each of our board members just to offer a quick 1-minute word of welcome to all of our members today.
Thank you, Superintendent Stevens. I just want to say that I'm really excited to be here. I'm honored to be here. And I also want to reflect that this has been a really strong and very powerful moment of activism, both within the African-American community and your allies. And this activism feels a little different to me because it's not only recognizing, although that's a part of it, kind of police brutality and institutional racism, but it's also, I feel like, really speaking to the pain that people experience consistently. And I am committed, and I think that our whole board and our staff are committed to helping make sure that the students and the families, the Black students and their families, don't face racism at school. And we're not there yet. We're far from it. And I'm committed to help making sure we get there. Or at least we can call it when we see it. Stop it.
Thank you, Judy. I appreciate that. And let me now move over to I have Ty Alper, Director Ty Alper.
Oh, thanks. Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you for having me here, and thanks to our staff for organizing this, and Dr. Bristol for facilitating. I'm excited to meet you. We were asked to be brief, and I just want to say that it's great to have the opportunity when we're not able to be physically together to at least come together this way and hear from our Black families, Black students. I don't know if there's any students here, hopefully a few. And I'm excited tonight to be here to hear from you all, learn from you all. And thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I did not prepare a slide for Beatrice Leyva-Cutler. I apologize. But Director Leyva-Cutler, would you like to offer a couple words?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to all who are here, our panelists and our organizers of this, and all our participants that are here today. I'm in this space to listen, to learn, and to see what actions the board can take, both to uplift the African-American community and our students of color, but also what actions we can take now and not wait, because that is the biggest issue that we have, of waiting and putting things aside. So I look forward to hearing and listening and learning. Thank you.
Great. And we'll work backwards to Director Khadija Brown.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Just as my board colleague said, I'm really excited to be here tonight. During our last town hall, there were so many wonderful thoughts that came up through the thought exchange process, and so many things that we didn't get a chance to touch on, so many important things that we didn't get a chance to touch on. And there's been so much that has transpired within our district since then. So I am really happy to be here. I'm excited to hear the real and the honest feedback in real time. And I'm excited that my board members get the opportunity to share this space with us, and we'll have the opportunity to be reflective. We'll have the opportunity to learn and to listen, just as School Board Director Leba Cutler said. So the conversation also doesn't stop here. It should continue in our inboxes when you send us emails. It should continue in your advocacy when you make public comments. And so thank you so much for all of the organizers tonight, and thank you for allowing us to be a part of this necessary conversation. And I hope that just as the last time, what is said here in this town hall meeting will help to move our district forward in a way that we need to move. So thank you for allowing me to be here.
Great, thank you very much. Before we go to a statement by Casey Robinson, I neglected to introduce one of our parent panelists. Also joining us this evening is Leanna Lewis. Ms. Lewis, welcome to you and thank you for being here. And now I'd like to invite Casey Robinson, who's prepared a statement that she'd like to read before we begin the question and answers.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Stevens. Hello, Berkeley. This statement was prepared by our group as we wanted to make sure that the energy in the room, the Zoom room, as well as the container that we have, the conversation is really based, it's an asset-based conversation. And so that's where that comes from. We are calling it a statement of resilience. We are a people of light, of joy, of power, of humanity, of purpose. We, the families, caregivers, teachers, leaders, community members, and students are enough. We will forever be enough. We are capable of creating the learning environments we deserve and expect those historically and currently in power to act in concert with our capacity. Even during both current and past times of unmitigated oppression and rampant assaults on our bodies and lives with the intent to crush our souls, we remain full of light and power. We are a resilient people, and we persist because of resilient people. We embody umoja, unity, and maintain unity as family, community, and race, and a race of people. We embody kujichagulia, self-determination. We define, name, create, and speak for ourselves. We embody ujima, collective work and responsibility. We maintain and build our own community by solving problems together. We embody Ujamaa, cooperative economics, through building and maintaining businesses and recycling the profits in our community. We embody Nia, purpose, and work collectively to build communities that restore the greatness of our people along the African diaspora. We embody Kuumba, creativity, and innovate ways to leave our Black communities in more beautiful and beneficial ways than the communities we inherit. We embody Imani, faith and the belief in God, family, heritage, leaders, and others that will support the liberation or true freedom of Black people. Thank you. I'll pass it back to either Dr. Stevens or Dr. Bristol.
Thank you so much, Ms. Robinson. We really appreciate that. So we're now going to jump in, and so I'm going to invite Dr. Bristol to take over at this point. And Dr. Bristol, so that you know, I do have these 2 slides just with the sort of generally the roles that will play through the Q&A section.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Casey, for those words, and a reminder to be that we are here and we exist for a purpose. I'll just say maybe just a couple of words, and then I'll turn it over to the panelists. This season has been hard. My family is from New York. New York is home. I've lost 2 family members to the coronavirus and a close family friend. And so I feel the weight of one of this country's pandemics. The constant public lynching of Black people in this country, they remind me of my own experience as a high schooler in New York City being stopped by the police. And so I sit with, and so that this season is hard. And if there's anything, and I also sit with the satisfaction that my daughter, who is currently a Berkeley elementary school student in Berkeley Public Schools, I sit with the deep satisfaction that in the middle of March, my daughter stopped going to school because the school in which she had, the classroom in which she sat, I had, and my wife, who was also on the faculty at UC Berkeley, who worked on the survey, the most recent parent survey, had to daily build up our daughter, who was constantly being, having her psyche attacked. Early in the school year, I was shocked to see my daughter reading at a grade level that I did not know, that I was aware of, that was below her reading level. And I went in and I asked her teacher, I said, how is this possible? And I demanded that my daughter's teacher retest her. And magically, right, within a week, her reading level increased by 2 levels. So this has been a very hard year. And if anything, and it's because of my own class privilege, right? Because my wife and I have the time to be at home. But in the middle of March, there was nothing that gave me greater joy than to have my daughter not sit in that classroom. And my wife and I have because of our class privilege, are weighing our options about whether we will return back to the district. And yet I sit here being tasked with doing this work. And so I will be a good student and do what I've been tasked to do. So this evening, you'll hear from a couple of panelists. And I should just say quickly that much of my research focuses on examining the school-based conditions needed to recruit, support, and retain teachers of color. So I have done work in New York, Compton, working with a bunch of superintendents of color across the country, and that's what I do during my day job. There are several panelists, and I'll just quickly just share with you what to expect during this panelist discussion. What you'll have, the panelists will paraphrase and the input from the thought exchange. They'll ask each other questions, they'll push, grapple with each other. There'll be a response by the superintendent or a designated staff member and that will add to the question, and then there may be some follow-up questions. For the attendees, please, we encourage you to place your comments in the chat box, and then at the end, there will be a Q&A session, and you'll be able to join in the conversation that way. So I'm going to now turn over the first question to Shante Joseph, who's a parent leader at Berkeley Arts Magnet Elementary.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Bristol.
Travis is fine, by the way.
Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Travis. Again, my name is Shante Joseph. I'm a parent at BAM. I have a son that's entering junior high this year and an incoming kindergartner. The African American Success Plan has not been developed this school year. The collective feedback shared via the thought exchange and the BHS demands presented on June 9th is that there are looming concerns surrounding educator diversity, teachers making connections with students and parents, and culturally relevant curriculums for both on-campus and distance learning. Initial reports from teachers show that 1/3 of Black students are not participating in distance learning classes, and that there is a limited engagement from both the district to both parents and their family members. The question is, what are the timelines and deadlines you have set to complete and execute the African American Success Plan for the 2020-2021 school year?
Thank you. So I'll jump in on this one, and then I welcome participation from other folks on the staff. So I am just finishing my first year here in Berkeley. As I was getting to know the school community, I saw lots of efforts that had taken place over the course of many years. That included anti-bias training, that included a variety of professional development opportunities at schools. I was aware that Berkeley High School had started to organize its professional development into affinity-based spaces to support both educators of color and white educators, to have much more candid conversations about the way that race and racism was impacting the school. And then I saw a variety of sort of conference going, partnerships with organizations. Looking at all of it, what I sort of struggled to find was the sort of coherent through line. There were lots of efforts going on, but there didn't seem to be sort of a plan or sort of an organized way to work on multiple fronts at the same time. So I came in sort of recognizing that there were a huge amount of assets and obviously a very high level of commitment. But there was sort of some need to pull it together. And so in pretty short order began working with a team of administrators and as well reaching out to some parents on an informal basis to begin thinking about what a plan might look like that would do a few things, that would help us make a steady set of investments towards the success and support of African American students over time, and that would help us feel that we had a coherent strategy that worked on multiple levels. As we started to do this work, I shared a few of the plans from some districts that have impressed me. And I might take a quick minute to share, because we can do this through technology, what those plans have looked like in a few other places, and then I'll talk about where we are. So one of the things that we looked at as we were sort of beginning to study what a district level plan would look like is work that has been taking place in LA Unified. One of the sort of activities that I thought could potentially be powerful is that they engaged African American community in LA to begin identifying root causes, to think about sort of what's going on underneath the statistics that's producing these statistics in such consistent ways, despite the many efforts that LA, or in our case, Berkeley. You get a sense here of the kinds of root causes that the community itself is beginning to identify in the LA school district. And I think what makes the model important and powerful is that it is in fact the community working in partnership with the staff to try and get at, again, these root causes. So in LA, they talked about things like adult mindset, about believing in the fundamental capacity of African American students to succeed. They talked about the need to institutionalize culturally and linguistic responsive pedagogy. They also talked about cultural proficiency in terms of designing plans and importantly policies. And then they talked, I thought, in powerful ways about, well, in this case, LA's sort of lack of effort to build a respectful relationship with the Black community in LA. So this is one plan that we looked at. I think it's got sort of powerful prospects. We looked across the Bay at what San Francisco has been doing, and there were elements of the San Francisco plan that were also impressive to me. Over on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see what they've been working on, and this is the idea of a scorecard. So they have written a plan, and so they have major strategies that they're trying to implement. They have benchmarks, meaning they have ways to know if they're getting there. And then they actually report publicly on how they're doing against their agreed upon plan. So we do lots of planning, we report scores. The difference here, or the difference with San Francisco, is that they're really being deliberate about designing measures connected to an explicit theory of improvement, a way of making the district better to support African American students and their families. And then we looked in addition to the plan that Boston has been doing, this is just a way that Boston has actually been developing its own metrics. They wrote a plan specific to supporting African American students, and then they're just regularly in the sort of practice now of reporting on progress that they're making on goal statements, on past deadlines, and then you can see in sort of graphical form what it's looking like as they make progress. So no one of these plans is perfect, and a plan itself doesn't produce change. But a plan can lead to more coherence across a system, and ultimately what we're talking about is a system level improvement. So to go directly to work that we had been working on right up to the point of our school closures, we had begun, this is a group, again, an informal parent group and a group of administrators. We'd begun to do a selective review of a lot of research by and about African American students, and had begun to assemble some categories that we need to work on at the same time. So we talked about access to opportunity, and that means fundamentally being in classrooms where there's high expectations of all students, and African American students in particular. We talked about the power of a number of strategies related to positive identity development. The need to tackle implicit bias among all of our educators and staff members, diversity, and family engagement. Now, we did advance the work a little bit more and begin to fill in some of these sort of indicators. This is a different version of a chart that we had by about March. And our plan was to begin working with a local consultant who's well known in the African American education community to take these basic ideas and move them forward. On March 16th, of course, COVID closed our schools. And simply to be candid, we have been trying to recover from this really staggering wave of school closures, fall planning, and budget cuts. So it is my commitment to get this work back on track, and very concretely, by way of a timeline, plan to work over the summer with a number of staff members to get back on track with this consultant, to begin to engage community members over the summer and into the early fall, so that we have this plan ready to be operationalized roughly in September, so that we can be informed by a coherent plan over the course of the rest of the year. So I know that I went on a little bit at length on that one, but that's sort of the evolution of this plan over the course of the year.
If I may jump in and just add to the conversation a bit, I think one of the things that Dr. Stevens has really done here is give us kind of some options, right? So we looked at several districts and the way that they have approached the work. And I think one of the things that is very important to highlight within each of those districts, particularly in San Francisco, and what I'm most familiar with is Oakland, is that the team that has been put together and the infrastructure to do the work is present and in place. And that is something that currently for our district does not yet exist. And so I bring that up to say that amongst the comments in the thought exchange, there was a direct question for me in terms of why isn't this work being housed and positioned underneath the African American Success Project. And I think one of the things you have to examine is the way infrastructure is placed and if it allows you to actually do the work. And so in San Francisco, my equivalent position looks a lot different, and the same in Oakland. And what I mean by that is that that's either executive deputy type of director level position, but not a management level position, right? And so my position is one in which I manage one individual that is at one school site and has a classroom, right? That is not a whole team and a whole department dedicated to doing the work. And so what you often see is that when the infrastructure is put in place, you don't sometimes need to go outside and then hire a consultant, right, to be able to do the work. And so I think the bigger question for us is, as we look at this timeline that we need to kind of accomplish something, are we willing to then re-examine within our own building and our own infrastructure, whether or not we have people in place to actually do the work? Because we can bring in a consultant and they'll give us guidelines for how we move forward, but we'll still need a team in place to be able to do the work. And I've actually, over the last several days, have been working on a plan in which I'll submit to Dr. Stevens and Associate Superintendent TR later this evening around how I think that we can get that done with some kind of strategic investments in the African American Success Project, so we don't necessarily have to go outside the district for the total sum of coming up with the plan.
And that, for folks who don't know him, that's Kamaro Gwynn is the manager of the African American Success Project in the district.
To follow up on that, Dr. Stevens, I think, you know, Kumar, you make these great points, and I think identify some clear opportunities for investment. And I guess my question is, what are the investments that we can expect that will show up in fall 2020, and how will those be targeted specifically and directly to African American students and be student facing? Because as someone said in the chat, right, we've had scorecards. We also spend a lot of time with task force, and we come up with things, or we have things that are adult facing, but what are the investments that will be student facing and that we can look for in the fall within our distance learning platforms?
Yeah, it's exactly the right question. You know, and I don't unfortunately have the answer to it right now. We are, for the next 2 weeks, trying to rebuild our entire district budget in the face of pretty catastrophic reductions. What we are doing is we sort of do these budget reduction exercises, holding a set of equity investments, both protecting our current investments and then also looking to build on those investments. So some examples that the board has been discussing is the creation of an equity fund next year to be deployed flexibly by programs like AASP or by the Black Studies Department. That can pay for tutoring, that can respond flexibly to needs as they come up in the coming year. We're also in discussions right now about expansions of the Office of Family Engagement and Equity, both to be able to address some of the technology issues that families are having, but then as well to think about just broadly educational opportunities for families. And then I would love to be able to sort of fill in the middle school parent liaison gap. Where we also know that there's significant need for outreach. So we're holding these priorities. We're you know, sort of, we got dollar amounts attached to them, but we're not at the finish line yet, Ms. Lewis, about actually building this budget for the next year. That'll all happen in about the next 3 weeks.
And I would also like to add, within the next couple of weeks, our summer school, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. We're also starting our summer school programs on top of our traditional summer school program that BUSD has offered, which has included the BEARS program, extended school year, credit recovery, and senior diploma. We've also invested in enrichment opportunities. So we have 3 enrichment opportunity camps that are taking place at the end of this month. One is specifically directed at student facing and supporting our African American students. That is STEM Steps for Success, which is being run and hosted by the African American Regional Educational Alliances. And at this point, we will be serving up to 30 students. And I believe in speaking with Ann today, the program is at capacity. So we'll be serving 30 students, rising 6th through 8th graders in that program.
And Travis, would you, just to check in on our process, would you like to sort of check in on the chat, or how should we go from here?
So maybe I'll move to the next question given our time, but I have been looking at the chat and will encourage others to look at the chat as well. I will just say about the note about consultants. I've done a great deal of work primarily in larger urban districts. And the consultant piece, while it of course becomes very lucrative for us as consultants, I have often found that districts see that as a crutch, and it sort of absolves the district of moving forward because they're at the whim of the consultant. The consultant said, and I've often found that the real knowledge is with the people who are knowledgeable about the system. And so I don't know anything about the consultant, but I would encourage, I don't know what role I have in this conversation, but it might be helpful, I think, for you and the board to think about how much ever you're paying this consultant to actually maybe redistribute that, because the knowledge I have found often is in the system, and we consultants come in and do good work, make nice glossy materials, and then leave because we really have no investment. So if you really want to move, I would maybe encourage you, while you do the work with a consultant, that you also might think about the knowledge within the system to move the conversation forward. Question number 2, I'm gonna punt it to Laura Babbitt at Rosa Parks Elementary.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Laura Babbitt, and I've had children in the BUSD schools at every level, and I still have one in the 4th grade. And during this time, the community has been fighting for change for so long that I also sit here heavy tonight, because I sit here seeing history repeat itself. In 2020, the BSU students are demanding what the 2015 BSU students demanded, what parents stated in the 2013 PCAD LCAP proposal, what the Black Professionals and Community Network presented in 2009. The list can go on, as the BUSD wheel just keeps turning the same requests, with constituents vocalizing the same needs. We've been nice, we've been fed up. We've requested, we've demanded. We've done the research and provided the results. Yet in 2020, our kids are still demanding, number 1, mandatory education on racism and the layers of prejudices against Black students for staff and all students, immediate action, education, and/or punishment for acts or remarks of racism toward Black students. We've called it cultural competency training, culturally relevant pedagogy, strategies which come to close the opportunity gap. But quite frankly, it goes back to what the white principal explained to me in 2010. The need is to combat racism. 2 little Black boys wrestling is violence. 2 little white boys is boys being boys. In the brown eye, blue eye experiment completed in 1968, white kids scored lower on material they had already scored higher on after being discriminated against for 1 day because of the color of their eyes. So I ask you, first by quoting the 2015 BSU co-chair, the BSU wants the district to institute comprehensive racial sensitivity training for all Berkeley High faculty and staff. The training should be ongoing and not limited to a single professional development day. Black students cannot be expected to feel safe in our classrooms or on our campus if staff is not equipped to discuss or handle issues of racism or bias. Question: what is your strategy to end racism, build cultural competence in BUSD, and hold offenders accountable?
Thanks, Laura. I appreciate that. So I'll just sort of speak personally. It's been quite a long time since I came to see the problem in schools in a different way. You know, as I was earlier in my career, really thought that the sort of key to success in every classroom was a teacher who knew the standards, who knew the curriculum, and who was passionate about pedagogy. And I think that those things are still true. But what I came to understand a long time ago is that it's this sort of eroding effect of low expectations that, to my mind, is the single most pernicious thing that goes on in classrooms. And those low expectations, you know, they always sort of track to skin color. And I've been in and out of many different school districts and have seen this over and over again. You know, what I've been enthusiastic about is the approach that Berkeley High School has adopted under its teacher leader professional development. And that is a commitment to several running years of ongoing dialogue about the impact of racism, about bias, about privilege, and as they're starting to really unpack it, about the impact of white supremacy in our classrooms. So these are very explicit conversations that they're having. They are oftentimes in heterogeneous groups. They're often in affinity groups. And they're giving opportunities for educators to talk in very honest ways about the ways that privilege and bias are showing up in these interactions. The next part of that, though, has to be some level of, it's having information and accountability. You've got to be able to know whether or not it's working, and then you've got to be able to talk to folks about what's not working. And that, I think, is a step that we need to keep working on. So I think it's a powerful model. It's required of all the teachers there. It is their professional development model. And we can take from that and really think about how we expand it into the pre-K and K-8 worlds. where it's also, I think, equally needed. And the other thing I would say is that bias training, these conversations about racism, can't be seen as an aside. They've got to be embedded in every single thing we do. They need to be the work that we do, as opposed to being thought of as a separate workshop that's attended on a voluntary basis. So I certainly welcome comments from other staff members on this one, but that's my take on it.
If I may, thank you, Superintendent Stevens, for asking that. I think the ongoing training, of course, is something that has to happen, but the criminalization of our children in our schools can't, and this is not a dig at you, Superintendent Stevens, but it can't just happen through trainings. There also has to be some way that not just our teachers, but our principals are also held accountable for the push-outs of our children, for the criminalization of our children, for, just like Ms. Babbitt said, our children are literally put in a position where they cannot learn. That it broke my heart to hear Dr. Bristol say that he was relieved when his daughter did not have to go to school. So there has to be, I mentioned this in our school board meeting, but there's a huge need for some checks and balances, right? And we need to ensure that our principals are in a position to make sure that those checks and balances happen. And then us as a district, we need to ensure that we have a committee of folks who are saying, okay, if we're doing this on a quarter by quarter basis, to ensure that we're checking off what's right and Xing off what's wrong, we need to empower those people and create those spaces to do so. We have an anti-racism task force that has not been utilized, but would be the perfect place to utilize for that. But I agree with you, and I appreciate you for the work that you've done for identifying that our teachers need training, yes. However, it's a little bit more than that training. And I know that you know that, Dr. Stevens, and I appreciate you putting a lot of thought into that. But I think we got to call out the elephant in the room. It's blatant racism. It's disrespect. It's racism. And it should be a crime how our children are not able to learn at the same rate. And then we talk about the achievement gap. We talk about the achievement gap this and the need for intervention. But we don't talk about what happens in the classroom, right? We don't talk about how our hallways are babysitting centers, right? We don't talk about that, and we need to.
Can I just ask us to keep going a little bit on this? I think Laura's question ended in what happens when we know and see examples of teachers, principals, school staff, exhibiting their racist beliefs on young people. And I think school board member Brown was so perfect in the checks and balances. And I think right now there's always, well, we'll do culturally responsive training and we'll read Zaretta Hammond's book and we'll do these things. And yet it remains, right? We have Dr. Bristol's daughter having an experience this very year. My son had a very similar experience where we were looking to move to get him out of Berkeley. And so these are just parents here, and like Dr. Bristol, I used all the work that I've done in Berkeley and all the degrees that I have to go and chart up to the principal and say, please help us. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? I don't need to cry because my 8-year-old is treated in a particular way in a classroom. Shouldn't have to be that way. And so I want to hear more about that checks and balances. What happens when we know we have examples and lived experience? We have data that shows they are misscoring students' work, and teachers are doing this consistently. I mean, if we even took a short panel or a short survey from this panel, more than one person would raise their hand.
And I agree with you, Ms. Robinson. And when we talk about school pushouts isn't just about expulsion or suspension. School pushouts is parents saying, I'm not going to continue to allow my child to come to school and be treated like a criminal. I'm going to take my child out of the school district. And that's not the narrative that we want to push. Of course, that's not the narrative that I want to push, but it's real. It's real and it's happening. Sorry, I'm going to let you answer, Superintendent Stevens. Take a step back, but it's real. That's what school pushouts are.
Yeah.
Can I add and ask that we get something specific around how these things are also going to be addressed contractually? Because right here, I think no one here is going to say, and we don't have any expectation anyone's going to say, well, that's not true, right? But similarly, there hasn't been an accountability part. And so just like there is an endeavor to ensure that we're holding police officers accountable by looking at contracts and making sure that contracts are not standing in the way of accountability. Right, what is the board and how are we looking at the contracts and the way in which contracts are a cover for resistant, right, teachers and lack the accountability in terms of having a viewpoint into the classrooms. So what are we doing to address that barrier? What are we doing to address that barrier?
I don't know if Superintendent Stevens is going to say anything. This is Judy. That is actually a really interesting point, and I love that you brought that up. You know, the unions in our district have, they have a lot of power, and I think that that's actually a really great suggestion. And I also wanted to just have Khadija, Director Brown's back, because what I have seen, like both from my kids being in school and now, 8 years on the board, is that it's not, sometimes it is what you're saying, that I can't remember your name, but that teachers score low or, kind of expect that African-American students are gonna, not succeed. I also feel like one of the things that is really troublesome to me is that our teachers sometimes, not all of them, but some model for the non-Black students kind of how, like this treatment of kids, like they're, there's this like assumption they're not equal. And so they're like, all of the racism from society gets brought sometimes into the classroom. And I think that impacts all of our students, it impacts our Black students, and it also impacts our white students, because, they need to be learning from the adults in their life how, like, we need to stop, we need to figure out how we are stopping racism.
So Judy, you've been on the board for 8 years. So what have you done to address this with all of this knowledge you just showed for us that you know?
Well, Laura, you have been on this, we have a lot of the conversations, and I'm not going to say that we have done everything, but I'm going to say, because obviously we haven't. We have made lots of attempts, everything from ethnic studies to teaching, to anti-racism classes for the adults, to like, book, like sharing, reading, and discussions about racism, to all kinds of efforts to close the opportunity gap. I think Laura, that we have, we actually spend an incredible amount of time talking about this, and kind of, we set up the family engagement office. We've done a bunch of different things, and I'm sorry, because of my accident, my memory isn't as clear as it used to be, but I will say that is that the I'm sorry, just gotta it's not for, anyway. And I think I have been one of the leaders. I think that the board changed really drastically around the time that I got on it, not because I got on it, but that was part of a change to a more kind of equity-minded board. But the thing is that what is really exciting about what's happening now, and then I'll shut up, is that now I feel like almost for the first, I've been really supportive and an ally to a lot of the Black Lives Matter movement. But I think, now it is just so much more personal and individualized, and like, just, I don't know, I just feel like it's a little bit different right now. And I think that is really helping. I don't know, I'm hoping that we can change the experience of our classrooms, because it's not just, what teachers do, it's the experience in the classroom.
So maybe I'll ask Dr. Stevens this, and then we'll move to this to the next question. I think historically we've thought about improving schools by focusing only on teachers. I think there's a clear body of research and actually to improve schools, you actually have to focus on the building leader. So could you maybe talk specifically about the work that's happening with building leaders, just as principles around building their capacity to understand how you enact some of these practices that we've been talking about? What's happening with the building leaders specifically?
And Black leaders and Black principals, please.
I might back up though, and just I do think that Leanna Lewis's sort of comment about essentially what's going wrong in the relationships between teachers, students, and their families is also important and powerful. There are no shortages, I've been aware in my year, of stories that result inevitably for a whole variety of what appear to be justifiable reasons and justifiable in the views of teachers, but that nevertheless wind up resulting in African-American students changing classes more often, or changing schools more often, or spending more time in the hallway, or more time down with the principal. In one way or the other, the effect is always to be moved from the place of learning and put someplace else. That's true of special education, it's true of intervention programs. And so often what starts as something that's difficult to detect for the teacher and is quite obvious to the family is ultimately unaddressed. And I've been aware of those stories. I've already started to have those conversations with principals about how it is unacceptable at the end of the day, that the end result of these interactions is a student being moved from the place of learning to any other place. And ultimately, I do agree that at the end of the day, it comes down to professional expectations and the willingness of supervisors to absolutely insist that all students can learn and will be present in the space of learning. And when that's absent, there's just too many backdoors. So I say that to acknowledge that I am seeing that. I've seen it in many places, and that fundamentally the backstop has to be effective leadership that just refuses to give up on this idea that students need to be in their classrooms and served effectively. So in terms of leaders, there's a few things going on. One that I'll point to. Well, I'll point to two things. So first is a project that's gone on for 2 years that's explicitly about supporting our leaders of color. This is a partnership with Rebecca Chong up at UC Berkeley that's designed just to create an affinity space for our leaders of color who are sadly not plentiful enough. And it gives them an opportunity to talk about the impact of being a leader of color in a Berkeley school. So that's both an opportunity to describe the pressures that they feel in a community that can sometimes think it's conscious about issues of racism, but can nevertheless trample on leaders of color, all the way to having to be the sole person who consistently brings up issues of equity across the entire staff. So that effort to support leaders of color, to bring more leaders of color in, but ultimately to be able to surface these issues in a way that's safe for the leaders of color to their white peers, to my mind is absolutely critical because they possess a lens on an issue that we all have to hold and hold as the centerpiece of our commitments. The other, as I've sort of described a few times, the work going on at the high school, and I'll just talk a little bit more about it. In their particular instance, one of the things that they've done is ask every single leader to do a day of shadowing a student. And they were very explicit about the students they selected. It was start a day to end a day. And the whole point was to get a sense from the student's perspective of what it's like to travel in and out of classroom spaces and hallway spaces and a variety of friend and peer groups. And the whole point was to begin to develop this perspective about the many subtle difficulties that students can experience, and African-American students explicitly can experience just as they pass through their day. And those things they don't come up in reading books, they don't come up in professional development. And that kind of, call it an empathy interview or an empathy walk, until you sort of develop that empathy and have some sense of the minute by minute challenges, it's very difficult, especially for a white leader, to understand exactly what's going on for an African-American student in our schools. So I'll point that out as something that's promising. There are many other things, but those are two.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I add one more thing? And I'm going to take a step back. But I think those type of exercises are what's really going to be important and impactful. Dr. Bristol, you cautioned us earlier make sure that we're being careful about our consultants, and also look at our systems within first. I'm really, really proud of the educational consultant that we have. I've had my own personal experience with her, and she's come into my school and has done exercises like that, where we no longer are just gonna have professional development sessions where we say, you can't do this because it's racist, or this is what this says in this book, but she actually led us in a discussion where she took some of the excerpts from teachers within our school that were extremely racist, obviously didn't put the names with it, but put them in her professional development, and had us as an entire school call out, how does this affect this student? What does this mean? How does this affect our communities? So our educational consultant has that type of background. Her and her entirely Black run staff know this type of work. And so I'm grateful, Dr. Stevens, that you brought up these important exercises that need to happen in a way of checking and balancing, in a way of checking what's wrong, and then figuring out a way to balance out what needs to happen. And I'm really interested also, I know we probably don't have the time, but I'm interested also to hear about contracts, like Ms. Lewis brought up, and what impact that will have on inappropriate and violent behaviors to our children. So I know, Dr. Stevens, that we have to move on, but I would like to hear from you, maybe another time to speak to that.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So there's sort of two. Let's suppose that there is a disciplinary issue with a teacher, and for the sake of this conversation, let's suppose that the teacher has behaved in a racist way towards a child. There are sort of two ways that a principal can approach that particular issue. So there's through the route of evaluation, and evaluation is something that is formally described in a contract, and that's true for most unionized folks. There's also a second route, and that's through progressive discipline. And that is not described in the contract. And principals actually have broad latitude to use the various progressive disciplinary steps. And all of that work falls entirely outside of the ambit of the contract. So a lot of this has to do with leader training and the ability both to name issues effectively, to know how to present evidence, and then to select the appropriate track when it's warranted. So I'm a little less likely to say that it's the contract so much as the leader's skill set in using both of these tracks effectively, both to support, because we want to do that for our educators, but also to hold accountable when it's necessary.
Just really quickly before we move on, I did want to uplift the importance of something that Dr. Stevens just said is around common language and making sure that we're seeing the same thing as we walk through our classroom spaces. When I was first here in the district, I was introduced to an equity rubric that has been in place for quite some time, which would allow us as leaders to be able to push into classrooms and then be able to calibrate amongst ourselves about what it is that we're seeing, right? And so until we're able to get on the same page about what's actually happened in classrooms, all of the work that was just mentioned is not able to be done, right? And so, as a former school leader, it was very important for myself, my team, and my coaches to be on the same page about what we were seeing so that we can then call it out and actualize a plan to be able to prevent it moving forward in the future. And also document it, right? If it happened last month, are we making progress the next month? And then lastly, one of the things that often gets overlooked in terms of being able to have some systemic kind of accountability, we have an office of Title IX, but oftentimes we don't look at and consider the possibility of an office of a Title VI coordinator, which actually deals with civil rights violations, et cetera. And so oftentimes what happens is that a parent might come and they might say, hey, I experienced discrimination or racism. We don't yet have a metric to be able to evaluate and say, yes, that's true, or yes, that's false. And that falls back onto the individual that received that complaint to then therefore make the determination as to whether or not they believe it was racist or not. And so I think that you can measure by the law what that looks like. And I think that it's time for us to maybe to consider whether or not we have the personnel in place to be able to make the appropriate decisions, that when a parent comes and says, hey, I think it's racist that a teacher is degrading the grade level of my student, and I think that's based on color, then you have somebody at the district office who's willing to do an investigation around that to see whether or not that's true or not.
This is an extremely robust conversation. Thank you guys so much. I just want to acknowledge all of the former teachers and teacher, Kimberly Nichols and Sam Frankel. and all of the other parents who are putting, Jessica Arroyo, teacher, who are putting some amazing comments here. We are going to have another one of these to be able to follow up on all of your responses. So with that, I'll pass it back to Dr. Bristol.
And I will pass it over to Tiara Mosley, parent leader at Berkeley Independent Studies, to ask the next question.
Hi, good evening. As Dr. Bristol said, my name is Tiara. My last name is actually Maldonado, and I am the parent of a third grader at Berkeley Independent Studies. And I just want to say, you know, thank you, Dr. Bristol, for having shared your experience. Casey, for having shared your experience. Mine was very similar. We actually removed our son last year very abruptly from a different Berkeley Unified School District school that we were attending, due to the fact that my son was experiencing both racism, discrimination, and criminalization, and just disproportionate discipline in his school setting. And so for the safety and preservation of his well-being, we immediately removed our son. And, you know, thank goodness we were able to do so. However, our hearts bleed for the families who are stuck, so to speak, who don't have their voices being heard, and whose students are suffering and have been even prior to COVID-19. And I want to say that I believe it to be a state of emergency. This social isolation did not start with COVID-19, but rather many, many years ago. I'm a 5th-generation Berkeley child, native. We have been here. My family has worked in the Berkeley Unified School District for many, many years. They've done outstanding work, and still somehow we managed to be treated like second-class citizens. So I want that to be noted on a record and in a public forum, so that we're not just hearing, but we're understanding and knowing that this is the long suffering that has existed and does exist for all of us whose children are still being looked at as less than, and we still have to come show up and advocate beyond our work, beyond that which it is we intend to do regularly. That being said, I'm going to build a little context around the next question. So during the last town hall, parents commented through the thought exchange that an African American advisory council should be created. This council would meet regularly to hear implementation updates and provide feedback surrounding issues raised during this town hall or by our BHS, BSU student demands and other issues as they arise, which impact African American, Black, and mixed race students that identify as living the Black experience within BUSD. The model of this council could be similar to the BSEP PNL, LCAP, Parent Advisory, ELAC, or DLAC committees, in which parents are given adequate time, space, and information to advocate for their children and school communities. Given BUSD's longstanding opportunity gap, it is imperative that this type of accountability be honored. Are you open to having an African American advisory council? If so, how would you ensure that this council is not a check the box meeting, but is one in which we can expect measurable outcomes?
So yes is the yes. You know, as I came on board, I felt very lucky to become involved with a number of very active African American parents here in Berkeley, and sought their counsel very regularly just to understand what was going on in the district, to make the little bit of progress that we did in creating that sort of plan that I shared with you that now desperately needs an expert's hand to finish. But ultimately, that plan and the measures that accompany it have to come with some form of accounting, some form of reporting. And it has to be, I think, directly connected to the folks who have the very largest stake in our success, our shared success, and that is parents. So I'm absolutely open to it, would love to be able to put it together and think that it's a more formalized structure where the group itself has a real hand in shaping the form of the agendas, the purpose, the kind of presentations that would be made. All of that feels very powerful to me and is potentially transformative if we think about this not only as a partnership opportunity, which I think is a typical sort of committee when it's running well, but to sort of accept that there's a level of accountability that we need and will ultimately benefit from, even if occasionally it's creating discomfort. And that, to my mind, I think is just absolutely essential that we set up the conversations so that we're working on issues that are genuinely going to make a difference and that those issues are defined by the committee itself.
I just want to highlight that Healthy Black Families shared that It should be an African American Community Advisory Council. Many of us know that it takes the community to help raise our families, not just mom, dad, is, extended family members as well. And there are people in our community that see and experience racism, firsthand. And so I think that was a wonderful thing that the Healthy Black Families brought up.
And they also added, it must be multi-generational caregivers, which is very important to our community.
So if it sounds like there is some support for this idea, is there are there measures or steps we can take to move forward then, or how can the board and or does it need the board? Like, how can we move forward with this and make this a reality if there's agreement that it's a good idea for accountability and likely a way to try to start rebuilding trust, which has been eroded between the district and Black families, as evidenced by what we've heard tonight.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious to know if the community would feel more of like somehow want to hear it from the board, we can bring it to the board. But I honestly don't think that this needs to come to the board, that this is something that staff can do. And I'm curious to hear what Superintendent Stevens says.
Yeah, I mean, please push back, and if you sort of don't think that this is the right set of steps. We've got the next 3 to 4 weeks that are going to be pretty intense for all of us as we try to redesign the budget and figure out what in the world the fall is going to look like. But I do imagine that there's going to be a period through the summer where our heads will clear a little bit. And I think it's an opportunity, as I've described before, to re-engage with the consultant that Director Brown was describing, to just try and put the finishing touches on a plan. That plan doesn't need to be a perfect document. It just needs to help define in ways that are common the kinds of action steps that we're committed to taking. I could also see over the summer pulling together a small group and really working on a charter document for a committee. That doesn't have to be a big deal, but it really is describing its purposes. What do we hope to achieve mutually through this meeting? How often are we meeting? What kinds of information do we want to share? So that it's really sort of setting the roles in the right way. And then come the beginning of the school year to actually begin recruiting in a more formal way for members of this committee, so that it becomes sort of commissioned and begins to work. Another thing that I can give some thought to is making sure that there's a staff liaison to the committee. I would commit to participating personally in this committee, but certainly can't run it. And so would want to give some thought to how to find the right level of support. So that every one of these meetings is done effectively and everybody's feeling like we're making progress together. So I think concretely, those are things we could do, and I'd welcome other ideas that might add to that effort.
So we have 76 people on this evening that have attended that are here, and I want to turn it over to them to ask questions. I think it's a testament to the urgency of this work that so many people would have joined, and so I'm going to give them space and time to ask questions to the panel.
And if you could just use the raised hand and I will call on you. I do not see a question yet. I don't see a raised hand yet.
I saw a raised hand from Cal Bryant.
And in the chat, Ayanna Davis made the point that this African American Community Advisory Board should also be advising the Berkeley School Board. So I think that's another piece to put in here, right? That some of those other committee and council formats don't necessarily also advise the board, but and I think that's a great point, Ms. Davis.
I see one hand, LaMonica Williams. Yes. I will do my best to unmute LaMonica.
Hi.
There you are.
Yeah.
Hi. I would like to know what are we going to do to support and change the inclusion program in the special ed department? We have been through 4 different directors of the special ed department. We've also, at my son's school, been through 4 different special ed specialists. And I feel at this point that the special ed department needs to be under investigation to see why the staff keep leaving. And we need more consistency with our staff so that our kids, our students can be able to succeed. Also, I would like to know what does that look like for the distance learning as far as the special ed community?
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Those are really good questions. Yeah, so it has been absolutely an issue for Berkeley that we've had a lot of leadership turnover over the last few years. We're about to welcome in a new executive director of special education in just a month's time. One thing that we're doing to try and just put sort of a more solid foundation around our new director, who we're excited about, is to make sure that some of the, that he's himself is getting support, both in terms of coaching, but then as well, just inviting an expert, a retired special education director to sort of serve as a mentor to him. We've done a couple things this year that may make a difference coming into 2021, including hiring additional special education staff to reduce caseload numbers and to reduce assessment loads. And then we're also just beginning a pretty formal and rigorous process to look at the significant disproportionality in our special education program. So what I'm talking about there is the over-referral of African-American students for special education services, which itself has its root in both classroom practice and then intervention practices at the school. So there's an opportunity there to sort of, again, get to the root of this. And so we're really committed to trying to make the most both of the arrival of the new director and then to think about this sort of systemic approach to the pre-referral work that needs to happen to support special education students. At the same time, I'm not sort of saying that these things are going to be, will solve the issues. And I think we owe it to ourselves to be in ongoing dialogue with our families about what's working and what's not working right now in our special ed program.
Williams. We have Rashay who has a question. You are, Rashay, if you could unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hi there.
We can hear you.
Hi everyone. At Sylvia Mendez. Okay, my school is, what are the plans that do we have for the Spanish immersion school for students that of color that are not learning at the rate because they don't have the proper resources for this school, you know, especially during the summertime, because how do they expect the kids to continue learning this language and immerse this in their life if they don't even have it ongoing in the summertime, and as well as even in the school year? Because I know that has been like a big concern of mine. I think that is a great program, but like we're very limited to resources, if that makes any sense.
It does, yeah, and I appreciate it. You know, I've had a chance now to meet many Sylvia Mendez parents, both Longfellow parents as well, and African-American parents who are chosen to send their students to Sylvia Mendez. I'm starting, you know, in my end of my first year to hear sort of themes in the way they're talking about their experience at that school, and they're really similar to what you're bringing up. I can't say tonight that I have sort of a plan for what to do about it, except to say that I have started dialogue with the principal and look forward to working with her next year to try and unpack this better. And I think that there's sort of two issues. It's sort of how welcoming the program is for African-American families and their students, and then ways that there are additional supports built into the program for students who might need them. And so I appreciate the comment. I don't know if any of the staff members have something else to add on Sylvia Mendez, but please know it's something I've heard. I just can't respond tonight to exactly what to do.
I do not see another, oh yes I do. Gregory Ward, I am unmuting you. Gregory? Okay, Babawa. Oh, Gregory, are you there?
Hi, how are you doing? Yes, I'm a teacher at Longfellow Middle School, and I've seen the positive impact that the Mojo program has had with some of our students. And I was wondering, would that ever be a consideration for that program to go to the high school and make an impact upon those students too?
I hope so. Kamara, would you like to sort of comment about that? But I'd certainly love to see something like that happen.
There are Black students to support. I'll be there any day of the week. The question goes back to infrastructure, right? And so if we want to make that happen, we'd have to commit to it and have a thoughtful plan about how we fund it and how we make sure that we're thinking considerably about how that would show up at the high school. When I first arrived, we did start there, but the funding for that position at that high school didn't carry over to a second year, right? And so you're right, Mr. Ward, good to see you to bring that up, but we must go back and recall our most recent history that we made a conscious decision not to continue that at the high school.
There was a question in the chat about K through 5th having that program as well. Is that an option?
I think all of these things could be options. I think Kamara is speaking about it in exactly the right way. You know, where you want to do the expansion, we have to think together about how to fund it and how to staff it, and then how it fits into the school day. I want you to know, though, I mean, the set of values, the principles, and the body of knowledge that's covered in the Emoji program is something I think it's very important for our students to experience. And so I'm very supportive of how to move that forward. We don't right now have a plan in hand to do that, but I'd be very supportive of doing exactly that.
Babawa Corneli, I will unmute you. Give me one moment, please. Babawa, I think you're already unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I have a question about the BUSD's plan for mental health services on the campuses, culturally responsive mental health services. What plan has been discussed, if any, or what the thoughts are about providing services on campuses or remotely, and physical space availability for clinicians, and like I said, culturally responsive mental health services throughout the district, K through 12.
Thank you for that question. So this is something actually we're working on very actively, Babalo, and hi, it's nice to hear your voice. So we have heard over the last quarter that distance learning has been, it's been a tough go for a lot of our students. We right now have been very actively soliciting partners who work in the mental health field, essentially sort of soliciting proposals to try and think about a blended approach to mental health services that would involve third-party partners, but make campus space available or be able to do it remotely. We have a number of local organizations that do work in a variety of communities, including the African American community. And certainly, Babalo, if you're interested, you could reach right out. I'd be happy to share with you the connections that we're making right now, because I know you've got lots of experience in this area. And we'd welcome the feedback about the potential partners that we're looking at. So we are actively thinking about this expansion for the coming year, so that these services are available both from our own staff, but from partners as well.
Thank you.
Did you call on me?
Don't know that we did, Ms. Davis, but hi, welcome.
Hi, well, I unmuted, so okay, well, thank you. I was wondering what is going to be put in place to undo some of the incorrect IEPs. Some of our children are miscategorized, and this follows them all through their life at school. Some of them, it gives them the resources that they need, and then many others are then denied access. And I'm trying to think of the correct way to put this. Basically, our children are being denied access and are labeled, and that label follows them around. And I have spoken to many parents that believe their children are mislabeled. So how do we give them the opportunity to then challenge that labeling and have an opportunity to have their children recategorized within the system?
Mm-hmm.
I think I asked that question in about 3 different ways.
I understand. Yes, so the special education process is a bit different than all others. Everything that happens in special education always takes place through an IEP team meeting. And it's always the option of a family to ask for an IEP team meeting, to question the results of assessments, to question placements, and even to question what's called the eligibility category, which is what I think you're talking about. So any family ought to know that they can, at any time, as a matter of law, ask for an IEP team meeting, and that all of those various questions inside of the IEP are fair game for a family to ask about. It's also fair for families to seek advocates and bring advocates into IEP meetings, or to reach out to what we call them program supervisors, but these are the folks who supervise the special ed teachers. To be able to begin working with them directly on issues that they care about. So that's the process. It's right through the IEP team meeting, and all of those questions are fair game.
Okay, thank you for that. But then I still feel like there are parents who don't understand the process and may not have support, or maybe they thought their child needed it at first, and then over time, perhaps the child catches up with learning. I mean, I can't go through every conversation in detail here, but our children are labeled, and then that label stays. You're telling me there's a process, and I'm saying, and I don't mean to be argumentative, but I must make this point, that there are parents who don't always understand the process, or students that don't know how to change this labeling. And as we well know, African American children are disproportionately in these classes, generation after generation. And we all know that it's not just because our children can't learn.
I hear you, Ms. Davis. Another option is, and I'll share it here, but it's very often the case that our Office of Family Engagement and Equity liaisons serve parents, are able to walk through the special education process, and oftentimes accompany families into IEP team meetings, just to make sure that the family feels that they have a voice as they're working with staff members.
Dr. Stevens, I'd just like to add that as we go into the next year and moving forward, true collaboration between the special education department and family engagement, I think is crucial to be able to do that type of parent education from when a child or parent sees something and starts to have the conversation about possible testing, et cetera, all the way through the process of identification, and us making sure that our parents have a comfort level and that we're telling them, you know, the right thing, the truth about what's going on with their children. And I could definitely commit to that as far as family engagement is concerned.
Yeah. And I want to say I couldn't agree with you more. That's so important to have cross collaboration through the multiple departments within our system. I also think it's important to look at the structures and protocols that are in place. More recently, we've been looking at data to figure out why are we so disproportionate. So we are doing some file reviews, looking at other data. And something that stood out to me just this past week is when you look at how students are referred. When you look at parent generated referrals, the data is very similar between Black families and white families. But when you look at when school sites are making the referrals, it's very disproportionate. So that has forced me to start looking at what are the protocols that we think we have in place that should be serving students, that should be supporting them as they're at the school systems, being referred to the cost teams or the student support teams. I don't want to see that those systems are in place that are fast track into pushing kids into special education versus what are the tier 1 systems that we can provide to students to build up some basic skills that they may need to get back into the general population.
I agree. Education around IEP placements is extremely important. It's important for our families. It's important for our families to have those resources, but it's also important for our educators to recognize what is behavior that needs to be supported by an IEP, or what is a behavior that needs to be supported by a conversation. And so those are a couple of the things that we have to think about. Ms. Caligari says we have 3 minutes left, so I'm gonna be quiet because I've been talking a lot. But education, not just for our parents, but for our staff as well.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to add really quickly, a few years ago, PCAD, in connection with OFI, we did a special education summit, and we created an entire toolkit to actually help parents through this process, understand the process. So if you'd like a copy of that toolkit, it's probably time to update it, but I'm sure there's some good foundational stepping stones that we can still make available to help. Thank you.
I'd appreciate, Laura, if you could just email it to me. Thank you.
Dr. Bristol, I am so sorry, we just sort of took over.
That's fine. It was a great conversation. I miss these kinds of discussions. We've closed. I was on leave this semester. So I'm going to pitch it to Dr. Stevens maybe for some closing remarks, next steps, and then Kamar for closing remarks.
Yes, and then we'll jump over to Kamar. So coming out of this conversation, we have some difficult budget conversations ahead of us. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be making critical decisions, not only to reduce the budget, but to protect and try to expand on a number of equity issues that we talked about tonight. I love the idea of working over the summer so that we're ready in August to form a parent committee. So some of you, although you don't know it yet, have been volunteered by me to help me do that. I'll reach out. And then as well, this sort of the question about finishing the plan up and working with working with a small team to get that plan into good enough shape. So that it really can begin to sort of direct the efforts as opposed to sitting on the shelf. Those are 3 concrete things that I've got in front of me for the summer. And then Mr. Greg Williams, I see your chat. I met your cousin Brandon Lucky last summer, and you should reach out to me. I'd like to talk. So let's jump over now to Kamar Ogwin, and he'll close out.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank all of you who have come together to make this evening happen. We express gratitude to our district leadership, staff, and school board members for your engagement. Producing an event of this magnitude takes much work. Often this work goes unseen by the public. We owe special thanks to Ms. Ann Caligari for her commitment and efforts in organizing tonight's event. Lastly, we must acknowledge the efforts of our parents and caregivers who have embodied the spirit of Umoja to rally yet again, and I say yet again, in support of their children. Although we collectively face a great deal of uncertainty, I'm grateful that we can always be sure that here in Berkeley, there is a community of elders who will fight for their children. In closing, I find it appropriate to discuss several things: power, privilege, and possibility. As we reflect on power, we must take into account an interpretation offered by Dr. Wade Nobles, in that we must recognize that the essence of power is the ability to define someone else's reality and to make them live in accordance to that definition as though it were their definition of their own choosing. It is apparent that as a district, we are struggling with the deep tension around the definition of equity. We must work together to resolve the tug of war for who gets to name what equity is. As we shape the future, who will be allowed to determine what equity looks like, sounds like, and feels like for Black students? Whose reality will Black students be asked to contend with? Efforts that fail to bring the Black community to the table suppresses agency, and pushes us further into the abyss of status quo. Our current status quo is one in which the vestiges of Berkeley's progressiveness has long faded. We cannot deny historical moments witnessed here in the city and within BUSD. But when we were allowed to rest upon the reputation gained from those actions of years past, we dangerously overlook the inaction of today. When we point to snapshots in time, we forget that our current moment requires us to take responsibility. We often use those moments as currency, to trade or to shield ourselves from the current reality. Our reality is one in which gestures are often used as signs for change, but are rarely met with concrete actions. Privilege affords an opportunity to never be required to move beyond the abstract. The privilege to remain in a constant state of thinking, to not be compelled to act, is a form of anti-Blackness. My statements this evening are not made lightly. They are not made with blame. I speak them in hopes that they will bring us closer to our expressed commitments. I am hopeful about the possibility of a better tomorrow for African-American students within BUSD. But I am left to wonder about what happens when the moment passes. When COVID passes and we return to campus, when the streets are clear and no one no longer says it's George, when the budget is balanced, what happens? It is possible that in this moment we will take action that future Berkeley residents will set their moral compasses by. It is also possible that we find ourselves on the wrong side of history. To honor this evening, I would like to ask that you carve out some time to consider the personal actions you will take to uplift African-American students. How will you make a difference? And with that, I bid you good night.
I say to all of you, this is the beginning, not the end of the conversation. This is the beginning. Thank you all so much, Dr. Bristol. I really appreciate your taking the time to help with facilitating this evening. Superintendent Stevens, it's a lot. You've got a lot of powerful and passionate parents. And I just thank you for listening, and I really look forward to everyone working together, school board members included, to move the needle forward for our African-American students. And with that, I bid you all good night. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night, Ann. Good night, everybody.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.